So we are hoping that as a result of this study and this class, that together we can become students of wisdom and begin to look at how we can apply what we've learned to the context and realities of our day. So it is my pleasure to welcome Rabbi Michael Pammitz.
Thank you for those gracious words, and thank you to the good folk of Christ in St. Luke's. It's not every rabbi who gets to be a rabbi in residence. So this is part of my ever-expanding only in America experience. In previous years, I've had the honor to speak to you typically for one Sunday at a time, and that's been wonderful. This winter, this fall and winter, I know it doesn't feel like winter at all, but this season we have the opportunity for a deep dive. And that's especially appropriate that given the expanded format, that our subject will be the wisdom tradition. Because when we study in a sacred setting, this of course could be true in a humanities setting as well, but especially so in a sacred setting. When we study, we seek not only to be informed. I would certainly like to know how to operate my DVD more surely. That would be informative. But I would not become a radically better version of myself were I to know how to operate the DVD as well as any random 11-year-old. What we seek in this kind of study is not only to be informed, but hopefully to be transformed. We want the engagement with our sacred sources to help us to become better versions of ourselves, which is so much the point of religious engagement. So I'm very grateful to Father Wynn and for the entire Christ in St. Luke's community for having the wisdom to focus on the wisdom tradition. That's by way of the general introduction. Now, the first thing that I believe we should do is sensitize ourselves to the notion of genres. So I'm going to make up a text or two, no pretensions of profundity, just for the purpose of illustrating the genres. I'll recite a couple of sentences, and I'll ask you to identify what you believe to be the genre of this. Okay, so the first one will be, Dear Aunt Trudy, thank you so much for the birthday gift. It's really cool. My mom says that this is the only non-electronic toy that I have. She says this will make me a better person. Whatever. Thanks again. Your loving nephew. Okay, well, we're going to practice what's called form criticism now. What is the genre? What is the Gattung? What is the genre of that text? What would you say?
Letter.
It's a thank you note. What is the Sitzenleben? These are the German terms that the founders of form criticism came up with. What's the situation in life that occasions this text?
Birthday.
An 8-year-old or a 10-year-old has been given a birthday present that he doesn't especially care for. But mom has sat on him so that he will write the appropriate. And he does, admirably. Okay, just one more example. This particular text comes on a letterhead, and it says, Smythe, 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 Smythe in Washington. You know, dear Mr. So-and-so, you are hereby informed that you are a party named in the last will and testament of so-and-so and so-and-so. You are requested to appear at our offices at such and such a day, at such and such an hour for the reading of said will and testament. Okay? So what is the genre of that text? It's a legal letter. I'm sure I didn't get it exactly right, not being a legal wordsmith, but you get the idea, right? So texts come in genres. If we apply the reading skills that we know from our reading of thank you notes to the reading of a legal letter, we would fail to understand it, and vice versa. If we took the reading skills from the reading of a legal letter and applied it to a thank you note, we'd get it wrong. I think it might be Carl Sandburg's poem where the fog comes in on little Pat's paws. Do I have it right? Pat's feet? Pat's paws. The fog comes in on little Pat's feet. If I were to read that with the reading skills developed from my courses in zoology or meteorology, I'd get it wrong. You need the reading skills from the genre of poetry to understand metaphor, and so on. Now, let's take this notion of genre and apply it to the Hebrew Scriptures. The most familiar texts in the Hebrew Scriptures fit into 2 or 3 genres. So I'll give you a quote from a text, and tell me what you think the genre is. After these things, King Solomon grew old, and his many wives diverted him from his purity of purpose. And he built pagan temples for them and sacrificed strange offerings, and he was rebuked for this. What would you say is the genre of that? Yeah, it's a narrative. Now, we could have a lot of debates about whether it's chronicle or history or whatever, but it's telling us something that the author is claiming happened. Yeah, another genre of biblical literature, I'll ask you to tell me the genre. If a man should open up a pit in a public thoroughfare, and another man should fall into it and come to harm, he that dug the pit shall surely recompense the victim. What kind of a text is that?
Personal injury law.
That's the law. And a lot of Bible is law. In fact, if we look at the 5 books of Moses, the Pentateuch, the large majority of texts in those 5 books fit into one of these 2 categories. Narrative, of one form or another. You could say it's narrative of a more mythological nature, narrative of a more political nature, but some sort of narrative on the one hand, and some sort of law on the other. And there are different kinds of laws, too. There are what we call apodictic laws. Thou shalt not commit adultery. And then you have what's called casuistic laws. If a man is in the forest chopping wood, and the axe handle flies off the axe, and it hits another person and kills him, but there was no malice aforethought, then the one whose axe killed the other person shall flee to the city of refuge to be protected against the blood-avenging kin of the victim. That's called case-based casuistic law. And it establishes the difference between homicide and manslaughter, which, by the way, is a tremendous advance in the history of jurisprudence. So you see the different kinds of laws, well, but law and narrative. Then I'll give you another. Thus saith the Lord, for the 3 sins of Israel, yea, for 4 I will not forgive them. For they have trampled the heads of the poor people into the ground. They have force-fed the Nazarites wine. A father and daughter consort with the same prostitute, with the result of profaning my holy name, etc., etc. What kind of a genre is that? That's a prophecy. Thus says the Lord is the hallmark of biblical prophecy. Now, it's not always reviewed. Sometimes it's consolation. Thus says the Lord, be comforted. Be comforted, all my people. You have that as well. But the hallmark of prophecy is that the prophet claims to be an ambassador from the court of heaven to our human courts. Now that can be a very difficult position. Jeremiah had a real tough time doing it because no one ever invited him to parties after he told what he had to tell them. He even says at one point, I hate what I'm doing, but every time I try to abstain from prophesying, I have this fire in my rib cage. You know, so today we give him Prozac or something, and we lose the services of an invaluable prophet. But now, those are the most familiar genres. Then you might know one other genre because it's very popular in liturgy. So, praise the Lord, O my soul, etc., etc. Oh, bless the Lord, my soul. What is the genre of a psalm?
Exhortation.
It's a personal, pious, probably liturgical genre. There may be very different uses for psalms, but we get the sense of it as, for example, if you remember there are psalms of ascent. I will lift up mine eyes to the mountains. What is the source of my hope? If you count the number of psalms of ascent, we learn that it matches the number of steps that led up to Solomon's temple in Jerusalem. And so we believe that the choirs of Levites had a psalm for each step. It took a long time to get up that step. But that's okay. They didn't have watches back then. Now, the genre that we're going to be looking at for the next several months is the genre of wisdom literature. So the first thing we need to know about it is what it's not. It's not narrative. It's not law. It's not prophecy. It's not devotion. Because it's none of those, when our image of biblical literature is set by those earlier genres, we begin to wonder, is this, properly speaking, biblical? The problem is compounded when works of the wisdom tradition fail to find their way into the regular liturgy. It's a problem in Judaism, and I believe that it's a problem in many Christian denominations as well. In Jewish worship, we are always reading from the Pentateuch, 3-4 times a week. We are reading Psalms every single day. We read the 145th Psalm. You open your hand and satisfy every living thing with favor, and so on and so forth. Great is the Lord, and greatly to be praised. God's greatness is unsearchable. There's a fun story in my congregation about a bar mitzvah boy, age 13. Now, of course, he's a mature adult. But at the time, when my predecessor, Rabbi Goldman, blessed memory, is the rabbi, this young man was leading the prayer, and he said, "Great is the Lord, and greatly to be praised. His greatness is unscratchable." And Rabbi Goldman came up with an impromptu sermon about, well, maybe it is true that God is unscratchable. So we read the Psalms every day. We read the 5 books of Moses every week. We read from the prophets every week. We read from what we call the minor scrolls, the scroll of Lamentations, the scroll of Esther, the scroll of Ruth, the scroll of Ecclesiastes, for that matter, which gets us back to our theme, the Song of Songs every year. But we never have a liturgical use for the book of Proverbs. We don't have a liturgical use for the book of Job. So in Jewish circles, it requires an education that goes beyond synagogue attendance to have the student be familiar with those books. And maybe something is similar in various Christian denominations. When I have visited, I've always enjoyed scriptural readings from the Pentateuch, from the prophets, from the Psalms, and then, of course, New Testament. I don't recollect a regular inclusion of Proverbs in a lectionary. Is there? Not that I know of.
Only,
On
I see my mouth.
select occasions.
Only in the daily lectionary.
I see.
morning and evening prayer.
And not enough people come to daily chapel service. Then you'll be the heart and soul of the congregation. So, we need to overcome the prejudice that this is, quote, not really biblical. I mention that because if you study the scholarship on the wisdom tradition, which, I mean, the wisdom tradition was very, very popular in the Middle Ages. Did anyone ever read a book called The Study of the Bible in the Middle Ages by Beryl Smalley? Beryl Smalley, a great British scholar, makes the point that these books of wisdom were among the most popular biblical readings in the Middle Ages, but they sort of escaped scholarly notice during the modern revolution in biblical scholarship in the 19th and 20th centuries, until they came back into view starting in the 1970s. A very great biblical scholar named Gerhard von Rad wrote a book called Biblical Wisdom in 1970, and since then there's been a lot of study of it. But if you go through the scholarship, and I'm going to pre-digest that for you unless you're really hardcore, to my mind, a lot of it is barking up the wrong tree. They wonder anxiously about whether the wisdom literature is of a piece with the rest of the Bible because it lacks those other genre specifics. But think about it. If you saw a short story, I'm sorry, if you saw a poem by Thomas Hardy, because he wrote poems, and you saw a novel by Thomas Hardy, would you be in an agony over the fact that the specifics of one genre aren't found in the other work by the same author? How could it possibly be the same author when one has these genres, has those genres? No, you'd say he was a master of several media. Right? Mozart wrote operas. He also wrote piano concertos. They have different conventions. So I think that the somewhat agonized search for how well does the wisdom literature cohere with the rest of biblical literature mistakes genre logic for contents. But that's my take, having immersed myself in this. The wisdom literature spokespeople themselves, the term of art is chacham. I don't know if you can say that. It's got two different kinds of gutturals in it. Chacham. The first comes from high up in the palate, and the second one comes from down in the throat. Chacham. If you can do that, you're ahead of most Americans. So the chacham means the wise person, the sage. The wise person says immediately that the beginning of wisdom is the fear of the Lord. First chapter of the book of Proverbs. So the putative tension between the wisdom tradition and the tradition of God's saving acts in the history of Israel, I think is an artifact of the way that the scholars are approaching this. Now, the books in question do have a questioning of biblical verities. And that might be what is misleading scholars. Because we're going to see that some of the books could be labeled, and I don't mean this in a negative sense, conventional wisdom, consensus wisdom. The best example of that is the book of Proverbs. And starting next week, we're going to be looking at the book of Proverbs. But two other books within the biblical canon can be understood as posing certain challenges to the worldview of the book of Proverbs. They are the book of Job, a magnificent and also anguished exploration of the problem of evil, of human evil. Why? I'm sorry, problem of natural evil. Why do bad things, why do diseases, why do collapsing buildings, why do mudslides, why do tsunamis happen to righteous people? You tell me. And the book consists of cycles of poems about this question, where Job's three interlocutors people who fancy themselves as friends, basically were telling him the pious thing to do is to blame the victim. It's your own darn fault if bad things are happening to you. And Job says, no, I don't see it. I don't see how my life substantiates that confident assertion. And then at the end, God shows up in a whirlwind and tells Job that he doesn't have the standing to sue. But then God turns around and says, and as for your so-called friends, you're more right than they are. They need you to pray for them. So we'll look more at that when the time comes. But that does pose some important questions to the worldview that we're going to see first in the book of Proverbs. Then we're going to look at the wisdom of, we're also going to look at the book of Ecclesiastes, which I like to call winter wisdom. The sort of wisdom that a person who's lived a long time and seen it all and isn't very impressed anymore. But nonetheless, the wisdom that comes from there. So those two books are not of a piece narrowly construed with the book of Proverbs, and yet they all fit within the canon, which is a way of saying, both the Jewish and the Christian canons, which is a way of saying that the great masters of our various rooms in the mansion, the great masters of our tradition, understood that there's room for the confident and there's room for the skeptical. We'll have an opportunity when we talk about Ecclesiastes to ponder, is doubt really the enemy of faith? Maybe doubt is not really the enemy of faith. Maybe cynicism, maybe narcissism is the enemy of faith. Maybe doubt is the catalyst to get your faith from the level of Santa Claus to the level of God. So we're going to have opportunity to think about that when we look at Ecclesiastes and Job. Nonetheless, those are tough places to stay, and it's not surprising that the literature as it evolved reasserted some of the more familiar and frankly very comforting thoughts of the wisdom tradition. So we're going to look at the wisdom of Ben Sirach, which is also known as Ecclesiasticus. It's very complicated because you have Ecclesiastes, then you have Ecclesiasticus. I don't have that problem because the Hebrew is Kohelet, the convener is Ecclesiastes. And Ben Sirach is the guy's name. Actually, it's his father's name. His name was Yeshua, Joshua, sometimes Jesus, but not Jesus, son of Sirach. And he was a great sage from the 2nd century. So you can see in terms of time, we're moving closer and closer to the era of the New Testament. One more work before we get to the New Testament is preserved only in Greek, and that's called the Wisdom of Solomon. That was written in Alexandria shortly before the beginning of the Christian era. That's also part of the wisdom tradition, but as we're going to see, it adds a very important new dimension, which is the dimension of thinking about immortality. It's not present in the earlier books. In fact, Kohelet laments, how can it be that just as a fool dies, a wise man dies too? I once heard it said that death spoils a whole lifetime of good reason. So Ecclesiastes, Kohelet, wrestles with that. And the solution proposed in the Wisdom of Solomon is to expand the framework to include not just a kind of a joyless Sheol, but this notion of being blessed in the company after your earthly life ends. And of course, all you have to do is go to a religious funeral, a Christian burial, a Jewish burial, and you'll hear this theology in practice. I don't know if I shared with you the statement that I learned from a judge, a good friend of mine, Judge Bert Sachs, when I first came to town 26 years ago. His mother-in-law had passed away, and we were in what's called the 7-day Shiva period, and he said to me that his former law partner before he was elevated to the bench said to him, Bert, we Christians believe that after we die, we go to heaven. Where do you Jews go? So Bert said, most of us go to Oliver's. So I told this to Morty Oliver, who's a very dear man. He said, well, maybe you're passing through. So the whole question of how does wisdom relate to the inescapable fact of human mortality becomes of central concern in the Wisdom of Solomon. And all of these many, many strands, as we will see towards the end of our gathering, all these many, many strands also show up in the New Testament literature. Because there are different ways of personifying wisdom. There is Lady Wisdom. There's also Dame Folly, by the way. But there's great Lady Wisdom. And then there's the notion that God's teaching, God's Torah, is wisdom. And then there's the notion that God's Word is wisdom. And if you're a Christian, you then have the notion that God's Word incarnate is wisdom. So we're going to see that the wisdom tradition encompasses the Jewish and Christian rooms in God's many room dimension. Now, I want to make sure we have time for a discussion for questions and answers, but perhaps I'll take about 5 more minutes to talk about the way in which wisdom language works, and also some of its most salient things. Think of the following aphorisms. A stitch in time saves 9. Have you heard that? An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. More or less the same message, right? So, why do we have both aphorisms? My grandmother, who was a proud card-carrying member of the International Ladies Garment Workers Union, look for the union label, right? ILGWU. My grandmother always said, a stitch in time saves 9. Now, she knew an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. I heard her say that. But what came unbidden to her was a stitch in time saves 9, because it cohered with her life. So we have different proverbs that express the same thought, because the proverb has to take the truism and make it vivid. Now, there's also the issue of the domain of a proverb. A proverb is not expressing a truth for all circumstances in all cases. More typically, a proverb expresses a truth that is true up to the limits of its domain. For example, look before you leap. Sounds good, right? But now compare that with the Latin, which I'll then translate, fidubitat perditus. He who hesitates is lost. That's the translation actually. So, should you look before you leap? Or, if you hesitate, are you lost? The answer is to reject that question as a false dichotomy. Sometimes you should look before you leap. Some other times you should not hesitate, because then you'll be lost. And the wisdom is to know which proverb to apply when. That's where the wisdom is. So, becoming wise does not simply mean memorizing the hundreds or thousands of aphorisms that we have. Becoming wise also means knowing how to apply them. Which gets us back to one of the main points. Wisdom is about how to live in the real world. And maybe that's why the wisdom literature is not narrative or law or devotional poetry or prophecy. Because God's saving acts are part of our story. In the Hebrew Scriptures, you have story rather than catechism. A wandering Aramean was my father is the Deuteronomic analog to the Nicene Creed. The farmer bringing his first fruits, isn't asked to say, I believe in this, I believe in that. He's asked to say, this is my story. So that narrative serves as creed in the Hebrew Scriptures. But what about right now? What about how I get from here to my home and whom I encounter along the way and how I respond to those interactions, and then the challenges that face me when I get back to the home, and so on and so forth, all through the day. We don't always have sure signposts from the burning bush and the 10 plagues and the manna in the wilderness for how to handle your obstreperous upstairs neighbor at 11:30 on Saturday night. Do you take a broom and knock on the ceiling to let him know he's too loud? Do you bring him a peace offering and say, I'm so glad we're neighbors, but my cat has a sensitive ear? How do you actually do it? Well, Proverbs will tell you that a soft answer turneth away wrath. Kill him with kindness, is what the Proverbs say. Unless, of course, he's your son. Then you gotta puke him. Spare the rod, spoil the child. Yeah, there's a certain amount of tough love in this as well. But I'd like to end my words of introduction with a certain note of humility. The authors of all of the books here unanimously say, you can be as wise as a human can be, and yet, God is deeper than the ocean. God is inscrutable, maybe even unstretchable. Great is the Lord, greatly to be praised, and His work is unsearchable. It's beyond searching. So the authors of wisdom know that you can never reduce wisdom to a cookbook. Of course, you can't even reduce cooking to a cookbook, but that's a whole other issue. It depends on barometric pressure and this and that. But you certainly can't reduce living to a cookbook. And the wisdom literature is about living rightly, living justly, living virtuously, living sagaciously. This will help, as Kohelet, Ecclesiastes says, the wise man has eyes in his head. The fool wanders about in darkness. So we don't want to be fools. We want to be wise. But we recognize that God's wisdom is always going to be greater than our own. And therefore, wisdom, in the last analysis, has to meld with reverence. Thank you so much for your attention. We have some time for conversation. William, could you come forward for a moment? I hope you all know William. You know William? William and I are going to be working together over the course of our semester. So, would you like to take a minute to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hey everybody, I'm Will or William, depending on whether you know me from a former life or my current life, or whether you just met me. I want to say a couple things real quick. First thing I want to say is we're going to be sending out emails about this class. Anyone who wants to stay updated with links to the videos or copies of the notes or just announcements like, hey, we're not meeting on such a day or something like that. So I'll have a computer up here. I'll have an iPad as well, so you can sign up. If you want to write this down, you can also go to ChristandSt.Luke's.org/wisdom. ChristandStLuke's.org/wisdom. That will take you to the sign-up form as well. Even if you're already getting the church's emails, just put your name and email address in there. That makes sure that you're on the list to get the emails about this class. Okay? Thank you for having me. I'm really looking forward to working with you and helping us unpack wisdom literature from the Hebrew Scriptures and then bringing it into a context of discussing, so what does that mean for us as followers of Jesus? In what ways does Jesus embody wisdom and how do we live like him? So looking forward to the next, however long this takes.
Will, before the rabbi, would you also introduce the other members of the team
Sure.
that have been working with Rabbi Franks?
Yep, absolutely. So Heidi in the back here. Heidi is keeping us well organized.
Did y'all get your schedule?
Yep.
I'm a schedule person.
Everyone pass those up.
Everybody should have them. If you don't have them, there'll be more up front. Okay?
So this gets us up through, I think, December, correct?
Yes, yes.
What
I didn't want to
happens after
overwhelm
that
you.
is anyways, yes.
We'll do a new one in the new year.
Heidi will keep us updated there. Hang on, I have to scan the room to see if I'm missing anyone. Yes, Francis is here as well.
And Melissa.
Melissa, thank you. Am I missing anyone else? Lynn, of course. Jameson Fowler, for those of you that know Jameson, I believe he'll be helping out as well. And Lynn, am I forgetting anybody?
Mother Sue.
Sue.
Mother Sue is in New Zealand, but she's also part of the team.
Yes. All right, so you'll get a chance to hear from a range of different people, bringing some perspectives, and we want a chance to hear from you as well. We're going to be building some time into these classes for you to share your own stories as well, so that we can benefit from the wisdom of lives lived in this room. Anything else? Okay, Q&A, we have a few minutes.
Yes, a word about the handout. I will strive to have a handout for you each session. I made 30 copies, and I'm so delighted to see that we have about 40 people in the room. It's always good to be proven wrong on that. What I hope to give you from week to week consists either of photocopies or my own notes of standard articles in the field. So today there are two texts. There's my notes to the encyclopedia article, Wisdom in the Old Testament, by Father Roland Murphy. Father Murphy is one of the great academic specialists in the wisdom traditions from the Roman Catholic tradition. And you'll see that this appeared in the abbreviation ABD. It does not mean all but dissertation. It means Anchor Bible Dictionary. Doubleday Publishing House has a religious division called Anchor Books. And the Anchor Bible is a massive scholarly undertaking that's been going on for 50 years. Scholarly editions of each of the books of the Hebrew Testament and of the Christian Testament. And in 1992, the Anchor Bible Project expanded to include a 6-volume encyclopedic dictionary. And that's called the Anchor Bible Dictionary. So I'll be giving you my own notes from those encyclopedia articles. The other part of today's packet is the introduction. This is a Jewish edition of the Hebrew Bible. It's called SONCINO, the Sonsino books of the Bible, one of the standard Jewish learning tools. It was a British publication from the mid-20th century. So you have Rabbi Cohen's, what a name for a rabbi, who would have ever thought of it? You have Rabbi Cohen's introduction to the book of Proverbs. So does anyone have a favorite proverb to share, or a proverb that has helped you in your life? It need not be from the book of Proverbs. It can be just wisdom that has helped you in a tight span or in moments of perplexity. Please.
My mother used to tell me, be sure your sins will find you out.
Be sure your sins will find you out.
Not in the Bible.
Now does that mean, be sure of this, your sins will find you out? Wow, that's powerful.
They did.
That's powerful. Angelica, did you have your hand up?
Well,
Henry had your hand up.
my grandmother's favorite was, them who hoots with owls at night cannot soar with the eagles come day.
My mother had a version of that. My mother was an English teacher and an English professor at college level, but in one of her high schools, she had a rather uninspired cohort in the fellow faculty, and so she put up on her kitchen, if you roost with turkeys, it's hard to soar with eagles.
If you always do what you've always done, you'll always get what you've always done.
That's right. I've also heard that the definition of insanity is doing what you've always done and expecting a different result. For sure. By the way, kitchen table wisdom is perfectly allowed.
Yes.
Sir.
Headmaster at Norfolk Academy admonished me by saying, run with the fastest.
Run with the fastest.
You said kitchen table. My mother said, you can fall in love with a rich girl just as easy as you can.
Yes, but you may not be able to satisfy her needs. Ma'am,
Lean not unto your own understanding.
that itself is biblical. That's
Yes.
One more question, if I could sharpen the focus of the question a little bit. Did you ever have a moment in your life, I don't need a confession, of course, but did you ever have a moment in your life when you were going through some sort of perplexity or difficulty, and the words of a proverb came to you and you found that to be helpful? I see some nods. Can I get an amen? No, wrong church. Ma'am.
When I was moving from the peninsula over here, I was looking for a church home. And I had gone to all the other churches except this one because I thought it was too established. But my mother's voice in my head said, never reject something until you taste it. And I came here and this was the right place to be.
I mentioned a proverb before, and it's because I had occasion to think about it. Sorry, Father Wynn is not here right now, but there's a concept that we clergy have called the high maintenance congregant. Familiar with this? The high maintenance congregant always has some problem that you have to drop everything else to take care of right now. Otherwise, you won't love her. That'll be proof positive that you don't love her. A version of that is she won't tell you what's bothering her, and you have to intuit it. Because if you truly loved her, you could read her mind. This is what a very wise LCSW once told me is a double bind. You're supposed to fail these tests because then the person has all the confirmation they need to quit the church in righteous indignation. So anyway, I remember dealing with such a person right after the Day of Atonement, which is supposed to give us the sense of equanimity and we forgive each other. Well, she missed that part of the lesson. And she was in a high dudgeon about this or that. And as I was talking with her, the proverb, a soft answer turneth away wrath, just kept on cycling through my head. And it worked. I've also had occasion to reflect on the proverbial phrase, hate is always stirring up a quarrel. Love turns a blind eye to every fault. That's what we call antithetical parallelism. We'll talk more about that next week. Hate is always looking for something to fight about. Love is always looking for some exculpatory thing. You'll see that happen to you. Okay. I think we're out of time now.
I think we are. Thank you so much for being here this morning.
No, I can stay for a little bit, sure.
Okay.
I'd be happy.
Yeah, you would be happy to stay and talk. We do have a service coming up as well, so just keep those things in mind. If you need copies of the notes or the schedule for the class, those will be up here on your way out. There's also a computer and an iPad. If you'd like to go ahead and sign up for emails, you can do that on your way out. Or again, PriceandStLuke's.org/wisdom. You can do that here as well. Thank you very much. See you next week.